I'm excited to be talking about it. Sorry, I'm just giving permission for all of the things. Excuse the distraction. So yeah, it's a topic very close to my heart, and I'm going to screen share, but before I do, I'm going to say, although the webinar was billed as a conversation, in truth, it's going to be more about the only way I can really have a decent conversation is to encourage you to use the chat. And I've asked Helene as my partner to monitor the chat, and she will kind of at times summarize what's coming in and give the feedback to me so that we can engage. If there is time, obviously at the end, then I will definitely take questions, but you will also have all my personal details. So if you want to correspond or engage with me beyond today's webinar, please feel free to do it. So I'm going to start screen sharing with all of you. Can you see that, Helene? Everything okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the way I've chosen to structure my conversation with all of you is really to tackle it through a couple of lenses and to really say, why is it so difficult for smart people? And who do I mean by smart people? I'm talking about the people who've signed on here already, people who are in positions of authority in organizations, in their families, people who are entrepreneurs, who are leading companies, people who are leading organizations, people who are highly qualified individuals, doctors, lawyers, etc. Everybody in that category of people. We really are seeing throughout the world quite a startling thing, and that is that the smarter people are, the more obsolete they are becoming. And I'm going to talk this through using my own experience, because I kind of feel that in today's age of intelligence, you could read a book, you could download some of the things I'm saying, and I will refer you to people who speak about this so you can follow it in your own time through TED Talks and see what other people are having to say about the topic. But really, this is a controversial idea that the more smart and the more senior, and we're seeing it at political levels and at power levels throughout the world, the more people are actually becoming obsolete in terms of the way that they are engaging with the world. So I thought we should get going by actually by asking you all to take a pen and paper. I hope you have one with you, and just follow the instructions here. So I'm really curious, and although I can't speak to each one of you, I would like to walk the road with you. And the way to do that is to create some sort of practical experience as we go along. So the first practical experience is, I want to know, just take a few minutes, and unfortunately we don't have the full time, to answer this. What's the one thing or a few things that you know now that you didn't know before the pandemic? So just take 3 minutes. You're going to write down anything and everything that comes to your mind as you think about this question. No filtering, no analyzing. Don't worry about writing pretty. Don't worry about your grammar. No one's going to read it unless you choose to share it. And in that case, you can share it in an appropriate way. So I'm just going to kind of give everybody 3 minutes and just pour yourself into that. As you're finishing off, you can just in the chat raise your hand so Helene can give me a heads up if most people are done. I'm seeing quite a lot of thumbs up, so I'm going to.
Elana, only see, guys, if you're done, you'd put just thumbs up on your picture, and I can at least monitor.
Okay, so in terms of what I budgeted, there's 1 more minute left, so we can maybe let people just finish off their thinking. I really am recommending and in fact begging you to do the exercises alongside me rather than just listen, because one of the key principles I'm going to discuss is how learning takes place, and that the focus is not on the person giving over, but really on the integration between what you're hearing and how you're hearing it. So learning about yourself is going to be very important. Okay. I make it 3 minutes. Everybody, I'm sorry. This is an exercise that you can do on your own. I really would recommend over the next week that you give yourself at least 5 minutes every day at some point to do this exercise. Just write it down. Reflect what it is that you know now that you didn't know before the pandemic. The truth of life is that the pandemic is the biggest social experiment of our time. We are going to be able to collect and amass data in terms of the sociological, physiological, and political and emotional context that human beings have traveled through this. And given that the last pandemic, there wasn't the kind of access that there is now, we're really hoping to amass quite a lot of real information about the human condition. And I'll tell you that that's a very critical part of creating learning. So what I am is I'm going to ask you to rebel against everything that you may believe about learning. And I'm going to ask you to question it, to really look at the ideas that you've inherited that have kind of been programmed into you. Because I know many people, if you are parents, would have already struggled with the whole teaching rather than learning context we find ourselves in this country and in fact throughout the world. But the same is going on if you're in an organization about investing in people's training, whether you send them out or whether you want to promote people and you try and pass over learning. So I'm going to ask for some of those ideas. The key lens we're going to look at is we're going to look at why what we know about learning is wrong, that it is not an external process, it's an internal process. What does it mean that we've got a learning dilemma at the highest levels in our organization? Why is learning emotional work? It's supposed to be about our brain, not our heart. And we have this philosophy about motivating people through reward and punishment in organizations and in schools and in any context where we try and motivate people to learn. Is that actually something that works? And I'm going to tell you no. So if I were to ask you what is learning, and I would have asked you each to put up a picture, my experience is most of you would have chosen the kind of picture I've chosen, which is a picture of a whole lot of young adults in a learning context. Well, not so much if you look too closely at the picture, not so much learning going on. Why? Why is there not so much learning going on? So at a practical level, what is probably going on in that lecture hall and is what is probably going on at every place where we have learning is that you have a teacher and a student. And the teacher's approach is that they have knowledge, they have information, and the student doesn't. So if you imagine a bucket, you could see teaching as I am the teacher, you are the student, you have an empty bucket, I have a full bucket. I'm going to pour my bucket into your bucket. My job is to fill your empty bucket. And we see that in terms of the fact of the matter, even in business where you are trying to learn all the time. And I'm hoping there are quite a few entrepreneurs on this call or managers or leaders that whenever we start trying to learn, it's generally because we're focusing on identifying and correcting something, an error in the external environment, something that's not working for us. our customers have a problem, our profit is down, our people are miserable, our worldview has changed. And so we have to cope with that. So it's very much an external need. And we try and meet that external need by focusing on problem solving. The problem about that process is that learning can no longer be about data transfer. We live in a world where data is freely available in books, in magazines, on the internet. There are subject matter experts that are so accessible. You can probably become a brain surgeon if you've spent a day Googling all of the information that's online. But knowledge and data are not learning. And that's why the Dr. Seuss's quote I really like is that the more you know, that's great, but knowing and learning are not the same thing. So that's the first new idea. And I'm wondering how you feel. I want you to tune in. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? How many people agree with me? If you could just put up those thumbs in your chats, just to get a sense. Okay. I'm seeing some movement, but not a lot, which is great because that works for me. So we're seeing some people who are really agreeing with me that we have to deconstruct learning. Learning and teaching are totally different ideas, and our idea of learning is coupled to our idea of teaching. And the whole issue is that we are externalizing the process and focusing on acquiring knowledge or skills or information. We even try, and I know in the object process, we have mentors where we try and access experience. Is that possible? Can you access and learn from somebody else's experience? Well, only if certain conditions are met. And I think even Helene, you would know from the object process that, and if there are object mentors on the line, and I think there are, that trying to teach someone or give them access to your experience is not necessarily a very easy thing to get right. Let's talk about what I mean about above the line and below the line. So when we look at learning, when we look at below the line, that's when we say, what's the problem? What's causing the problem, or what is to blame for this problem? And who can we, and what needs to change? That's below the line. Above the line is where we ask ourselves a different question. Who owns this? What is it that has created this? And how am I and the people part of the thinking, part of that? In other words, we have created the problem. It's not that we have to solve the problem, we have to dissolve the problem in order to create something new. But I'm going to talk more about it. So, okay, we have to deconstruct learning. Now we come across in all the writings, and you can actually read, if you just Google the learning dilemma on TD, you'll find many, many people talking about it. And Dan Pink is one of the guys who has done a lot of, I think, really interesting social and organizational experiments, and has got very strongly held views which align to mine. So what is the learning dilemma? As you can see by this picture, most of us look in the mirror from time to time. However, what we see in the mirror is not necessarily what's real. We see a projection of ourselves, what we believe we are. So we have an idea, and I'm going to talk a little bit later on in a slide about theory in use and espoused theory. So if I were to ask all of you, are you interested in learning? I guess I would be shocked to find somebody who would straight up say, no, I'm not an interested in learning person. The problem is that when we look in the mirror and we look at how we behave, that's the espoused theory. And I move into organizations all the time, deal with CEOs, deal with boards, deal with excos, and they tell me, Elana, we want to become a learning organization. But what they really mean is fix the people in this organization and change them. There is no capacity to really look in the mirror and say, if we aren't a learning organization, how have we created that? And what is it that we need to change to undo that? So why is that a problem for smart people to look in the mirror? It's called the learning dilemma. Smart people are almost always successful at what they do. They rarely experience failure. And because they have rarely experienced failure, they've never learned how to learn from failure. In other words, how to look into the lion's jaw at something that's not working and take ownership of it. Not try and fix it, but really take ownership of it at a personal level. So what happens is when we're highly educated, we learn what is called single loop learning strategies. And when a single loop learning strategy goes wrong, you often find leaders, managers, people in authority become defensive. They screen out any criticism and they put the blame on anything and anyone but themselves. So we can have lots of examples of this, but let me just make single loop learning practical for a minute. If I were to explain to you single loop learning, I would say a thermostat is a great example of single loop learning. So a thermostat would work that it's set to a certain temperature and it measures the temperature in the room all the time. And the minute the temperature drops to a certain level or goes above a certain level, it kicks in and rectifies that problem. That would be single loop learning. If that thermometer could ask itself a question like, why is my thermostat set to this temperature? What assumptions do I have that this is the ideal temperature? Is it always ideal? Is it if the room is fuller, it should be lower? If the room is emptier, it should be higher? So if it were to ask questions instead of just have that loop that we set up. So when we approach learning, whether it's as a teacher or as a learner, we tend to occupy single loop learning space. So if you're a manager and you want to educate one of your staff about how to change, and I actually saw the manager of Frangelica's is actually on the call, Deborah, so I can speak with her as witness, is that often when you are trying to teach someone to do something, you tend to break it down into the activities. This is what you need to do. And when this happens, do this, which is like the thermometer. We don't necessarily pass the meta skills, the thinking behind that. We don't have the patience. We don't even understand it's relevant. And so all learning takes place in programming people into single loop learning. And it's actually, it doesn't work. In order for us to actually start learning as smart people, we need to retool our ability to think about learning as emotional work. So the first step is we need to be able to reason productively. Now that can be really painful, and I'll explain why in about 2 slides when I talk, and some of you have heard me talk about unconscious incompetence and conscious incompetence. Now being consciously incompetent when you are at the sort of height of your career, in other words, owning up that I don't know what to do or what I'm doing isn't working, that is very painful. And whether you're a parent or in a marriage, actually keep doing what you're doing and it's not producing good results, we tend to start externalizing the blame, right? Something else is at fault. The attitude of our children, the attitude of our staff, the emotionality of our partner, whatever it is. So the pain of emotional learning can be something that's really too much for some people, but the payoff is great. The second thing that we have to retool is to question somebody else's reasoning is not a sign of mistrust, but a valuable opportunity for learning. So often I come across a situation where people would say to somebody, say in a meeting, a business meeting, somebody would say, but I agree or I disagree. That's not useful. That's not productive reasoning. Productive reasoning would say, if you say that, what do you base that on? Can you share with me what it is that has led you to this? Now, we tend to want to skip that. It's too much work. So we tend to, and you may even be going through that with me now, going, I like what she's saying there, but I don't like what she's saying there. I think I agree with this, I disagree with that, without necessarily fully understanding the reasoning that I'm using to actually reach the conclusions I'm sharing with you. So we have adopted a culture where we want to agree or disagree very quickly, and we don't want to participate in productive reasoning, which actually is the only way we can learn. When people question, we kind of say, I'm being challenged, or just do what I say, And one day when you're good enough, you can tell me what your questions are. And then we put in place reward and punishment structures to try and change behaviors. Just do as I say, whether it is a salary increase, an incentive, a promotion, just being emotionally valued, a report card, whatever it is. We say, let's measure if you're following these single loop learning instructions. If you get it right, I'll give you a reward. If you get it wrong, I'll give you a punishment. And huge industries have sprung up around this ideology of, job evaluation, grade evaluation, performance management, etc. In fact, most governments actually spend whole ministries in terms of like their labor relations, setting up processes to address this ideology in order to create good behavior and good relations. And it doesn't work. That is the truth. And Daniel Pink shows quite a lot of experiments on this. And he says that the nature of work has changed. During the Industrial Revolution, when it was much simpler to focus on activity, and that could be duplicated, it made sense to see learning in that way. But now we can't be like that thermostat. We have to actually acquire those skills to ask the questions. When we are teaching, we don't only teach at 68, do this or do that if it's above 68. We need to teach why. What reasoning do we have? So that if change and learning has to take place, it takes place along the full scope and the full spectrum of understanding the process. So learning cannot be a process of transmitting known information. This works when the time span of major cultural change is greater than the lifespan of individuals. But as we said, look at COVID, even look at the world around us. Ellis was telling me, people are really struggling. Why are people struggling? Now, this is an Elanaism. I work with industries, and I can tell you most of my clients are actually in this kind of limbo where they're almost waiting for things to go back to normal. Many of my clients in Africa, like in South Africa and Swaziland, as you all know, are going through some sort of social revolution, and people, as well as COVID and the death and destruction and economic forces that have come about through that. And instead of going, this is life as we know it, people are still in that single loop learning. They're hoping and yearning, this is going to pass. Well, it will pass, but whatever it leaves behind will not be the same. And we cannot operate like that thermostat and just try and kick in old solutions. So I'm saying that as you engage with life and with learning, you need to ask yourself to listen to your emotions and look at your attitudes, beliefs, and values. The things that you agree with are pre-programmed into you. They make sense to you because of the way you approach things. Sometimes you may need to suspend the safety of that and step into a little bit of the unknown. Are we really ready to do that? Are we really ready to become productive thinkers? In order to do that, you need to accept that the way you see the problem is the problem. Often we need to identify ways that we inadvertently contribute to the organization or our family problems, etc. We are part of it. And the way that we have behaved is part of it. It's not just, and I can speak about my own failings here, and maybe you are like me and maybe you're better than me, but I lead a couple of businesses and I consult to others, and when things aren't working, I tend to externalize. These people don't get it. They're not skilled enough. They're not attentive enough. They're not motivated enough. Instead of saying maybe something in me is also part of the problem. So I have to be willing to look inwards, to use my emotional intelligence, to listen to how teaching and engaging with others is making me feel. And when I become angry or irritable, it's not about them, it's about me. And I have to start learning how to reflect critically on my own assumptions, beliefs, and look in the mirror at my own real behavior. Now, this is a struggle. So hence that, why do we struggle? Because it's biology, it's not even psychology. So we have all information enters our brain, and it goes through various portions of our brain. Some of those portions are actually things we can control, others are not. The most basic part of our brain, our limbic system, is absolutely outside of our ability to control. You can't remember to breathe. You actually breathe. Sometimes when we're ill, we have to concentrate on it, etc. But as a day-to-day activity, breathing, the blood pumping, all of these things are controlled by the thermostat inside your body, if you like. And as information enters your brain, what starts to happen is it goes through your most primitive brain first, and some of you may have seen the hand, and then into your secondary primitive brain, and your neocortex hangs like this over your brain, and that's your thinking part. But everything comes up through the stem. And when we get irritable, and when we are frustrated, this happens. And our thinking brain detaches from our instinctive brain. And in order to become reattached, we actually have to do the work I've said. We have to breathe, we have to count, we have to notice behavior in ourselves. So we struggle against being really willing to look at ourselves. And the truth is that pain creates invention. Necessity is the mother of invention. All of the changes, all of the pivots that have come about are generally driven by survival. We should live in a world where people are constantly examining how can we do better, how can we be better, and not just do it as an act of survival. That is the most primitive part of us, and it's not learning. That is survival, which is coping. Learning is something else. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about how do human beings learn, and why is it such a struggle for us to learn. But really what we're seeing is the senior smart people, our doctors. Right now with COVID, there is chaos. I'm doing a worldwide project to look at supporting our medical infrastructure in the world. And yes, people are stressed, but what they're most stressed about is not the quantum of work. Because if any of you have a medical trained person in any faculty in your lives, you will know that the training prepares you for arduous work. You learn to work 24 hours, 48 hours, 60 hours on your feet, and you are expected to do that. That's not what is killing the hearts, but it is that what people are doing is not working. That single loop learning. I've practiced as a doctor for 15 years, for 10 years. I've learned everything in the textbook. I'm applying what I know. It's not working. It's not working. I'm frustrated and I'm stuck. So we see that the smarter areas of our lives and of our businesses are becoming outdated and no longer useful or used. It's not just computers. Okay, so unfortunately, we also live in a life of celebrity and adoration. So most people who are in positions of leadership get put on a pedestal of some sort. And here we have our superheroes lined up. Why do smart people, successful people struggle to learn? Well, you have Mr. Incredible Ignorance, right? Somebody who says, I know everything I need to know. There's somebody else who says, don't fix it if it's not broken. Mr. Do It Nothing, look at him. Mr. Do It Myself, I can't rely on anybody. I'm the only hero. I need to fit into that. Superman, give it, bring it on. I can cope with everything. Just got to avoid finding their kryptonite, because then they fall apart. And of course, right at the end, the boy in the costume, the person who's trying to emulate and imitate rather than understand and be. So it's a lot to give up, to be in a position where you have learned to say, I know, I can, I am able to, and to start saying what I know isn't working, and I can't do it without you. Please help me. Or what are the best ideas in the room apart from me? Or I think the way I've been doing things isn't going to help us succeed. Is there anyone who's got a better idea? So why is this so hard? It's hard because we as adults learn on both ends of this drawing. We sometimes learn starting at unconscious incompetence. That would be like learning to drive. When you don't need to know to drive, you never think about what it's going to take to drive. You just use the car, use the lifts, use whatever you need. You are unconsciously incompetent. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't really mind. It's not a problem. Then as you become ready to take your learners, you suddenly become consciously incompetent. In other words, you suddenly sit behind a car and you realize, I actually don't know how to work the clutch, the brake, look in both mirrors, use the indicator, drive on the road, measure my distance from others. So you become aware of what you don't know. That is a very sore place. When you're learning to drive, it's acceptable because it's a skill. And that's why for many, many areas of the business that are not at the very top, we can still get away with it. Why? Because we then become consciously competent. We acquire the skills and we now know how to do something. We then slip into unconscious competence. I don't know if any of you are like me, but I can drive from here to Durban. I don't even remember how I got there. I am on autopilot. And so we are on lots of things in our life. And at an executive level or as an owner level, I can tell you that when Deborah asks me certain things, or I see her doing things in a way that doesn't work for me, it's often like a shock to me because I'm so used to the way I think and the way I do that it hasn't been something I'm conscious of. So I'm unconsciously competent. That makes me very dangerous as a teacher because I'm not really in touch with what it is that I do at a reasoning level that allows me to teach somebody else or show them the best way. So of all of these phases, the most painful one is conscious incompetence. And what we try and do is move out of that as quickly as possible. And some of us even try to go right around it. And therefore, John Moore's quote, I'm able to control only that which I'm aware of, that which I'm unaware of controls me. So awareness is actually empowerment, which is a brand new idea. The other issue, as I said, is conscious incompetence is very, very sore. We feel naked. It's much easier in the top diagram to be focusing on you are not working fast enough. You are not learning this. You have made a mistake. It's much harder to say, I think that I'm frustrated. I think that I'm losing trust. I'm not sure how to help. I don't know how to reach you. I can't. So actually taking off a part of ourselves, showing our heart to others, that feels very scary. In actual fact, vulnerability is a credibility builder because we all, when we are being defensive, we are visibly defensive to those around us, even though we aren't to ourselves. So I'm sure you've had an experience like this either in your relationships with your spouses or with your children or with your friends or at work, where you say to somebody, I can see that you don't like what I'm saying. And they say, no, I'm fine. So that is an example of defensiveness where we can't see ourselves, other people can see us, and it's very difficult to engage with someone who is unwilling or unaffected by their own internal world. So people have an espoused theory of action. I am a kind person, I am a patient person, or I am an impatient person, and I don't tolerate fools. People now actually espouse that as their theory of action, but we have to watch people do rather than what they say, because then we can really start to see the contradictions between the espoused theory and the theory in use. If you want to understand how somebody is learning, you need to actually understand how they're acting, and you need to do that productive reasoning. Tell me what it is that is creating the need for you to do this. What is it that you are seeing? What is it that you are understanding? And if the minute you start asking someone that question, they become defensive, then that is a block to learning. And even when the individual commitment to learning is high, if the person is blocked, myself, I'm blocked, I don't really want to learn because it's too painful, or the other person who I need to learn from is blocked and is blaming and shaming, then learning can't take place. And this happens a lot at the highest levels of business. So can people learn? Yes, definitely. There are clues. Productive thinking. We need to start accepting every problem you're dealing with today, everything you wrote down on that paper about things that you learned. How did you learn them? Did you learn them because you had to survive something? Did you learn them because what you were doing didn't work? Did you learn them through pain? Did you learn them through emulation? These are the exercises that we have to start thinking about as we adopt an attitude of becoming able to learn. When we want to teach, we also need to make sure that we don't become defensive, that we open ourselves up to actually explaining our reasoning as an act of educating rather than as an act of defiance with us. And at every day, in every moment, we need to ask people to listen to their emotions, look at their attitudes, beliefs, and values. It's quite a scary process when you become alive to it. In this picture here, we see something that used to be our modes of transport, which has actually become obsolete now. Now we use it just for fancy weddings or photo shoots. It doesn't really have a use beyond ornamental. And I'm suggesting that the way that we have grown through the Industrial Revolution to this point, similarly, is something that's there, but we cannot rely on it. It's not really the way things should work. And the biggest way that we can take forward in terms of making learning real and human work and emotional work is to understand human tendencies, because we actually all, I mean, Jung said that in our shame lies our common ground. So I might think, oh, I really don't know how to do something, but the truth is, the minute I start owning up, I will find that the things I'm ashamed of, most people are struggling with as well. So what are the roots? And Daniel Pink does some really good work on TED. You can see he's proving these things and why training and learning has got to take a different route, especially for executive levels. He shows that because we have these tendencies that I'm going to tell you now, the more that we create a competitive reward punishment culture at the top of our organizations, in our boardrooms, in our management meetings, in our principal offices, the more we shut down people's capacity to actually be vulnerable, and therefore we shut down and build lower and lower levels of performance. So these are some of the universal human needs. Autonomy. We all want to remain in control, and we have to wrestle with that if we're going to own up to things that we need to do differently. We all want to have a level of mastery, to maximize winning and minimize losing. Unless there's something intrinsically wrong with you at a mental health level, most people get out of bed every day and they want to do their work, do their life well. When it's not going well, it's because we have to learn something. It's not because we're broken. We all have a need to suppress our negative feelings, which is why there's all the self-help industry that's grown up. Develop yourself. We all want to be like the coronavirus and reinvent ourselves all the time. We all want to be able to show that we have mastered the act of life and we can be rational. And we all act consistently, inconsistently. In other words, we have parts of our life where we're doing something well and we bring that attitude there, and other parts where that same attitude, because we are unconsciously competent in that area, we don't know what it is that's making that relationship or that particular piece of work, and we're unable to actually distill it and take it to another area. We all need purpose. The story about teaching somebody to lay a brick is a classic one here. You may take a bricklayer and you may show him how to lay bricks, or you may take a bricklayer and you may show him that the end product is to build a wall, or you can take a bricklayer and show him a cathedral. And you can say, you are going to help me build this cathedral. To do that, we do need to have some walls. We do need to have some arches, but we put everything in context. And then people feel like their work has meaning. It has value. It's widely known that one of the reasons prisons use repetitive menial tasks like dig a hole, tomorrow fill the hole, is that it destroys people's spirit. So to learn is really to change. And there's a fire there. The name of my organization is Isha. In Hebrew, that means woman. It also has the name of man in it. It also is the Hebrew poetic word for fire, and fire is a transformational metaphor. So I wanted to end this to say that to learn is to change. Without us having clear practical steps for how we are going to change and practicing the things that we learn, Old habits soon reassert themselves, and I can put up my hand for that. Learning will only last if the underlying emotional commitment is there. We have to ask ourselves, do I really want to change? And I think that even physiological change is characterized by this. So many people now are using bariatric surgery, bypass surgery. And what most successful bariatric surgeons are doing is they are taking people in and putting them through an interview process, which essentially says, this is not something that is going to solve your problem. This is something that you have to want to change in your life. And they do that by saying to people, you can't go through the surgery unless in 6 weeks you lose 10 kilos. The people then go away because they're motivated. It feels like a reward. They lose the 10 kilos. They come back and the surgeon says, well, you see, you don't need it. You've already lost 10 kilos. Go and do it for yourself. Or if they do get through those hurdles, they're then asked, are you going to be able to give up this, to give up that? We really need to look at ourselves and not externalize the solutions and not sort of adulate or hold in high esteem what we think are magic, silver bullets. A lot of content. It's something I'm very passionate about. I hope that at the end of this, when I started, I said, I wanted everybody to understand, let me have a look. What I wrote down, what was my successful outcome? Why do we struggle with learning? It seems bizarre. Our theory and espoused theory is that we are great at learning and human beings want to learn. And the more senior and the more educated you are, the more open to ideas and learning you are. So I've hoped to show you why we struggle, how we struggle and how defensive we become and how we externalize things, and also give you some clues as to what in my life and in my worldview would be a way to build really a learning society, learning businesses, learning families, and learning people. So that's my part of the conversation. I think we've got about, Helene, we've got like 10 minutes or so.
Correct.
If there are anything in the chat that you've been seeing, is there anything?
No, there's nothing in the chat, but I think if we can open up the floor, if everybody would like to put on their cameras and if you have questions for Elana.
Okay, let me stop screen sharing.
Anybody you'd like to chat to Elana about one of the topics? Any questions?
I hope
There's
you've
so
got
much
more
there.
questions.
I've got to go through the recording now before I can. There was just so much there. Thanks, Elana.
Thank you, Ellis.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask, Elana, it sounds like you're saying that,
Sorry,
managers.
who's talking to me?
Craig.
Craig.
Oh, Craig. Hi, Craig. Yes.
Yeah. It sounds like you're saying that managers or bosses must really chastise themselves first.
So that's such an
at some point,
idea.
the self-chastisement must end and the person needs to perform. There are certain mechanical tasks that they need to do.
So I just need to check with you, Craig. Did I, because maybe I screwed up, but did I ever use the word chastise? Because if I did, I need to fix it. I don't believe that. I don't believe.
No, you never use that word.
Okay, thank you.
No,
I'm worried for a second. What is it that made you feel I was saying chastise?
The approach that you're saying is your first port of call is to say, what have I done to make this possible, or to whatever I contributed that this has happened?
Okay, so I think that it's less about taking the blame. It's more about seeing learning and teaching as a process. So if you're a manager and you said there comes a time where chastising needs to end and people need to do their work. Is that right? That's what you said, Craig? So of course that is 100% right. You need to hold people accountable. But if somebody is not succeeding, what do you do then? You can do a number of things. You can give them warnings and eventually exit them. And there is a place for that, for 100% sure. But most people are obliged and even ethically predetermined to try and actually chastise the other person into changing their behavior. I'm saying if you want to change another person's behavior. You have to become part of the process. That's what I'm really saying. So you have to say, okay, let me and you work through what I think about when I do this. You tell me what you think about. How are you connecting the dots? This is how I connect the dots. I do want to say not everybody is given the same God-given intelligence and the same way of conceiving and engaging in the world. We have square pegs and round holes, and not every job can be done at the same level of efficacy by every person. But I'm speaking specifically to the topic of how do smart people learn? How do you as a leader become a better leader, a better enabler of others, a better unlocker of potential, a better creating productivity in your business? Because it's costing you money to employ people and you want to delegate those tasks. How can you approach that? So that's really, if you like, the frame around it. And I certainly don't think chastising has any place, not of others and not of yourself. Holding people accountable, definitely. Holding yourself accountable, definitely. Is that useful, Craig?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a place for us to actually raise our hands.
Yes, at the bottom, there's reactions. In reactions, you should find a hand, but please go ahead, Ola.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Elana. I learned so much. I think before this, I just used to think something was wrong with me because I was just one of those people that if you tell me to go do something, I have to know why. Because if it doesn't make sense, then I just look at you like a crazy person.
Great, great.
And that's always gotten me into trouble with corporate because it's like, oh, I told you to do this. But I'm like, but that's the result you're trying to achieve. I got the result anyway. It's just I didn't do it the way you wanted it done. And I think this actually it put a lot of perspective in that because I think especially when you think corporate, it's like very square. You know, it's like you do it this way, you do it this way, you do it this way. And it's like, well, there's some of us who actually don't think of it that way. It's like if I want to do it and there's a faster way to do it, then just do it this way. So I just wanted to say thank you. Like I got so much value.
Thank you. I just want to speak. Thank you for the opportunity. Questions are really important because they help me deepen my own reasoning. I love what you said. So you're really echoing the idea that when you ask questions often, especially questions to people in power, the more senior you are, asking questions feels like you don't know what you're doing. So if you were to say to somebody, why do you do it that way? They would feel like you're challenging them. And you're saying that's been your experience. And that has been my experience as an executive coach, as an organizational and people specialist, and as a strategist, that people do not like the why question. But you also said something important. Sometimes different means can get you to the same end. But it is true that for some organizations, they want you to use the same means. In other words, it's not okay for somebody to get to the answer in their own way. And if that's true, you need to be able to say that, you know, to people rather than just be disappointed in them.
I think that's actually a very important, this is such an important conversation. And I think that what you're doing is such a, like, I think every corporate out there actually needed. I had a really bad experience about like 18 months ago. And that was when I decided I'm never, ever going into corporate because it's like, you know, you see people with like, they are so brilliant. It's just, you can't judge a fish based on its ability to climb a tree, but you could judge it based on its ability to swim, you know? And I think especially, I think pre this whole COVID thing, I'm thinking that after COVID, everyone will be like more flexible in their like ways of learning. But I think pre-COVID, it's like everyone just looks at things like, oh yeah, it has to be ABC. Well, sometimes it's not ABC, just like it's never actually black or white.
Well, I would love to believe that people will become more flexible, but the entire premise of my work and my experience is that unless we face why we weren't flexible and why we were in the single loop, people are not learning anything. Because if you can see that, then you will learn something. If you can't see it, you're going to go back to the same habits. But you are right. And by the way, there's the older people in my generation are really struggling with what they call the millennials, because these kids and young adults are joining businesses with entirely a different mindset. And there's a real struggle against, is this a disrespect of authority, or is this the need to have productive reasoning? So it's interesting.
Thank you so much, Elana.
Deborah, can you mute, please?
Sorry,
Elana, can I share
Yes.
what I learned?
Yes, please. Sorry, I'm struggling to know who I'm speaking to. Just for some reason, I can't. I think I have to unpin myself.
Craig Sachs.
Yes, Craig, go carry on. Sorry, it doesn't come up.
I only learned two things that I could pick up, and that was, number one was I don't have to work so hard, and number two was the news and the news cycle is actually just mere entertainment and is a distraction from purpose. Those were the two things. I couldn't think of a third.
It sounds like you're kind of going, I don't like what you were saying.
No. I'm just saying these were the two things that I came to, but you're right. I didn't come to it through, I came to it through time over a couple months, during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It wasn't sort of typical learning.
And I'm sure, Craig, if you really look at those things that you feel you've really learned and mastered from the pandemic, or things that you know now, is that you'll notice that actually you have had to think about things a little differently and give up some habits that maybe you would have done if you were applying yourself to it as a straight problem to be solved before. So because the rules changed, you had to now examine the rules. Whereas before, we say the rules are the rules, and we try and solve problems within that paradigm all the time. And we say, you've got to be practical. One of the gifts that COVID did for me in my work is that I was able to say to people, look at learning. Organizations overnight said, you can't work in the office, you've got to work from home. And if I had said to some of my clients, or if some of my clients had said, let's all work from home, people would have said, it's impossible to do this kind of work from home. It's impossible. We have a paradigm and a way of thinking, and we never decide, we never review that. We constantly look for our solutions within those rules. And the gift of COVID is that the rules are not really the only way to solve problems. Sometimes you can actually tear up those rules and ask yourself the question you did before, which is like, is there a smarter way to do it? You can be like the thermostat, is what are we really trying to do here? And can we break out of what we've considered to be absolutes and consider what is possible? And people learned all on their own volition. By the way, that question about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, when people understood in order to survive and to actually take part in my business and to have a meaningful role, people who were totally not able to use Zoom or any internet applications, we didn't have to go through huge training. People sought out and went and found the things they needed to make themselves successful. So we've kind of infantilized our organizational population by telling them what to do instead of telling and how to do it, instead of sharing what we're trying to achieve and opening ourselves up to examine whether the ways we think people need to get there are in fact the only ways. And sometimes, like I was saying to Ola, it is acceptable. And I know this as a CEO, because I am a CEO. Sometimes there are different ways to do something, but I want it done my way. But I have to own up and say that, rather than say to the person, what you're doing is wrong. It's rather about, that is a right way to do it, but this is my way and that's your way. And I'm really asking if you'll do it my way. Okay.
Is your empty bookshelf behind you a subliminal message?
Why? Subliminal about what, Craig? That I don't believe in reading.
That learning isn't in the books.
No, but that's a great way to finish off the workshop. Thank you. Part of the learning is in the books, definitely. Everything has a place, but real learning is about change. It's about personal change. It's about action. And it is definitely about the pain of knowing what you've got to do differently. And that's sore sometimes. You can't always blame the externals, and you can't find solutions just at an activity level. So I know that we're almost out of time. I really love, in fact, we are out of time. I love the debate. I would love this to have been a real debate instead of a debate, a presentation masquerading as a conversation. So forgive me for that. Yeah, Helene, that's it.
Thank you, Elana. I mean, your information was insightful. Your information was thought-provoking, and many of us who run teams and departments and our HODs and CEOs have a lot to think about, and perhaps look at ourselves first. Yes, Craig has his hand up.
No, I was just saying thank you. I'm clapping.
Oh, thank you, Craig. Thank you. It is all about lifelong learning. And, you know, one thing about COVID that COVID has taught us, we've learned that nothing is impossible. And all the information that one needs is out there. You've just got to go and find it and implement it. Thank you, Elana. I'd like to put up a poll. As you know, AughtJet is an NGO. We rely